Hello, how you guys doing? This is Neil from perfectsunled.com and growpotcheaply.com, which is working again, and that's where you can find my free grow course and also my grow book. The Kindle version is only $7. And by the way, the Kindle app is free on anything you're using, whether it's Apple device or a Android device or a laptop, whatever. You can download the Kindle reader and read my book on it, so it's free. Okay, so this is day 17 update and day 1 update. So, because I might continue growing these out even though something went wrong, and I'm going to explain what went wrong in this video and how to avoid that yourself. And yeah, so the pH is what went wrong, and I'm going to explain how I was able to figure that out and how you can easily figure it out and avoid this problem altogether. So because these things had suffered a lot, like this one, it suffered the most at day 17. Look how small she is. But I remember that actually we've grown the strain before, Incredible Bulk, which is an autoflower. And I remember it's an okay strain, like quality wise. But I remember that actually, I think she actually gave it a decent rating. Anyway, I remember it starting off kind of small and then kind of getting big. And then Northern Lights times cheese typically, I think, would be a little bit bigger than this on day 17. But I've seen plants that are this big on day 17, and they still yielded over 3 ounces. So for an autoflower, so this isn't bad. But I just want to make sure we start with the best and give it the best possible run. And anyway, so what happened was the pH was very, very off. And let me go ahead and show this at day 17. Let me go ahead and mute this again so that it doesn't pick up. So you see some of these leaves right here that are kind of burnt on the edges? That's because the pH was so off, they were having a really hard time of taking their nutrients. I'm actually surprised they survived at all. And you'll see why in a second when you realize how low the pH was. Like, whoa, like how do they even survive that? Now, the photoperiod didn't survive it, so, but I'm really surprised these ones did. And I can only think because maybe they have such a vigorous growth because they're autoflowers, especially their veg growth is so vigorous that maybe that's why they pulled through it. I think Colossal P had a big playing point in this because it just gave them such a big head start. And they had all those plant hormones and stuff, and it also helps protect. And also the overall nutrients, the fact that there's fulvic acid in there, which helps break down the nutrients. There's fulvic acid in the CalMag, there's fulvic acid in the Colossal P, and the plant hormones. But I think that fulvic acid and my nutrients already being very well chelated, but also because that fulvic acid also chelates the nutrients, and also fulvic acid, unlike let's say something like EDTA, which is a chelating agent, the fulvic acid actually allows the nutrients to bypass the cell walls of the plants and be readily available inside the plant, unlike the EDTA doesn't allow that to happen. Anyway, so it has a lot of benefits, and so I think that that Colossal P played a big role here, and also just having that fulvic CalMag I think played a big role here. Yeah, anyway, so by the way, those are all available at perfectsunled.com right now. So all the nutrients are available, including the fulvic CalMag. So yeah, that was now to see how now they're looking nice and green. The camera makes it look a little bit lighter than they are. They're actually a lot greener than this. It's just you can see like how it's the light is so bright, and so the camera's trying to account for that. See how overblown this is. The white looks overblown. You can't see any of the details. Like, you know, this normally with your naked eye, you look at this and it's nice and detailed. You can see all the little bumps and stuff on these perlite, but you can't see it in the camera because it's just anyway. So just know that with the naked eye, these look a lot more green, but they were looking really yellow, like in here, almost white when they were younger. And this is all new growth up here, but down here, and this is all greened up too. But this was really bad looking. These leaves right here were all the way white out to almost here, like hardly any green at all, like so yellow. Like I said, some of them even started to, they started to die here on the edge. But they recovered, and they recovered because I figured out what the problem was and then had her fix it, and now they're good again. And that was the pH. So the pH probe had went bad. And so how do you fix that? How do you fix your pH probe, or how do you know? We can't fix pH probe, but how do you know if it's going bad? How do you avoid this problem? I'm going to give you a lot of tips and tricks really fast in this part of the video, just showing what you can do to kind of fix this problem. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure you replace your pH probe every 2 years. You don't really want to go over that mark. Even if you have a really good pH probe, that 2-year mark, it's hard to get a pH pen to last very accurately past that. So try to replace it like every 2 years. Sometimes you might have to replace it every year, but if you take really good care of it, you should be able to extend it out to that 2 year mark. The closer you get to that 2 year mark, the more you want to start doing these tricks and tests I'm telling you about. Now, some of these things my wife doesn't know about because she hasn't read my book. So definitely read my grow book. But and actually, you know what? I might need to update the book to actually have more information about this in there. But anyway, so here's some of the tricks you want to do. First thing is, besides making sure your pin's replaced, when you buy a new pin, right, calibrate it, follow the instructions, everything, and then test it in the 7, test it in the 4 after you've calibrated it, make sure it's still reading those accurately. Mix the 7 and 4 together exactly half and half. That should be about 5.2 pH, right? That's what it should register. It should register right about that 5.2 mark. And then test that, and you should be about 5.2. It's like, okay, cool, my pen is, everything's good. Keep that half and half mix too, so you can always test it every now and again. So just a quick way to test it, make sure the pen's still kind of reading accurately. Because if it reads the 7 and the 4, the streams very easily, but see if it reads that 5.2 accurately. Okay, then what you want to do is after you first make a batch of water, if you're using RO water, which I highly recommend, you're always going to have to use pH up after you add your nutrients into it, because it's going to, the water's already low anyways. It doesn't have any buffers in it whatsoever. The only buffers you're putting into it are the nutrients themselves, and on a whole, all your nutrients are going to have a acidic effect on the water, which means you have to use a pH up. Or in this case, I recommend just using a silica, because silica is beneficial for the plant and it works like a pH up. So it does both those things. It does more than just a pH up will do for you. Okay, so make sure to measure everything accurately, right? So when you make your batch of water, I recommend your first batch is make a gallon, and then add all your nutrients to it, and then see how much of the pH up you have to use. Now, make sure it's for whatever stage. So if you're using my nutrient system, if it's for the 4 milliliter stage, the beginning stage, then you want to make a note of that. Now, once you get into the 8 milliliter stage, where you're using 8 milliliters of both, you're probably going to have to use a little bit more pH up or a little more silica. And when you get to the 12 milliliter stage, toward the end of veg and into flower, you're going to have to probably use a little bit more. But make notes of this so you know how much pH up you're using, right? So if for some reason that changes drastically, you know that something's wrong, right? That something, either measure something wrong, or the pH pin is going bad, or you need to recalibrate it. So try to recalibrate it and then test it again and see. Try to recalibrate your probe like once a month also, just FYI, another thing you can do. Okay, so for me, I went ahead and did this experiment myself to see like where she was going wrong, like how much was she not feeding it. And it took almost a milliliter, about a milliliter of silica with when I did the, actually it wasn't very much different between the 4 milliliters, 8 milliliters each. So after adding all the nutrients, it was right about a milliliter with the new probe, with the new pin, right? I was using the new pin and I tested it. And I'm like, okay, I had to use right about a milliliter to get that where it was. I'm like, how much were you feeding them again? Because I don't watch her do this, right? And she doesn't have enough experience to know, how much you're supposed to put in there. And she just kind of thought, well, it's new nutrients. Maybe that's why it's not as much as she used to put with the old nutrients. And anyway, so she didn't think about it, didn't bother to ask me because she just didn't think about it. And I didn't think to ask. And so what? And actually, it wasn't. I already saw that they were looking a little bit. I didn't like the way the growth was happening when they're inside the humidity dome. And I was like, something. I'm like, make sure to boost up, start giving more nutrients, right? We'll see what happens. And then I can't get out there every single day to look at the plants, right, out in the garage where they're at. So it took me a few days to finally get out there and look at them myself. And then when I saw them, I'm like, no, this is bad. Something is wrong. Like, this is not good. Like, this is the stuff you need to tell me. Like, when you ever see the plants look like this, you got to pay attention. You got to look at the plants. If they look like this, you got to tell me, hey, they don't look right, right? And if you don't have someone to tell, you got to tell yourself. I'm saying this because it's easy to do that, right? To get in that kind of mentality where you're not thinking about stuff. So make sure you're always looking at your plants. And if like something doesn't look right, try to figure it out because something's wrong, right? If they look super light green, especially if the center of the leaves, right? The outer leaves, the outer tips of the leaves are still darker, but the centers are getting really light really fast, something is very wrong. And most of the time, it's going to be problems with the pH. So I already knew it wasn't the cocoa because I did that myself. I rinsed it and I made a video showing you guys how to charge it with cocoa charge. I did all that myself, so I know it was charged properly. I know that was fine. I know everything else, the nutrients, all that's good. I know the environment's good, right? All that was good. So I knew it had to be the pH. So I'm like, do me a favor, bring me the pH pen and all this stuff, the calibrating solutions and everything. And we didn't have all the calibration solutions, just the 7. So I went ahead and I did the thing I usually do. And I'm like, yeah, this probe I'm pretty sure is going out. And so I went ahead and I bought another probe and I waited until that next probe got here. And that brings me back to the story. Okay, so that's how I figured it out. I was like, I just saw the plants weren't healthy. They were too small, and the super light green was not good. So I'm like, we're gonna fix this. And so when I got the new probe, I had her make a batch of water like she would if she was using the old probe, right? Just here, use the old probe, we'll calibrate it, use it, and make the batch of water the way you did it, and make sure to be accurate with how much pH or the silica you're putting in there. So she showed me. She's like, well, I take the spoon, I went like this, I just put 3 drops in there. I'm like, whoa, I already know that's wrong, right? Because I already made a batch before this, and it definitely is more than 3 drops. So I already knew that was wrong. I'm like, ooh, I'm just curious how wrong, like how bad did this go? And so we made the batch and then tested it, and it's 5.8 with the old probe. Like, okay, the old probe claims it's 5.8, but what's the new probe say? The probe that's reading accurately. And so when I put the new probe in, and by the way, whenever you change probes, you want to recalibrate them, right? So I had to recalibrate every time I did this. The new probe, it's like 5.1. And I'm like, man, that's after I tried really hard to calibrate that old probe and get it working as good as possible. So who knows how bad it was before that. I guarantee you, though, it was worse than that. So she was probably feeding it well, maybe not worse actually, because she said that's about how much drops she put in there. So it's probably about what it was, about right around 5.0 to 5.1. That's bad though. That's not good at all. And the thing is, because it's RO water and because we're just putting enough silica in there to kind of get it to that 5.8 mark, it doesn't drift up very much. For example, when I made a batch of water, I pH it to about 5.7, 5.8, and then the next day, that same batch of water has only drifted up maybe to 6.0, right? So it hardly drifts at all. You're going to get a much bigger drift than that if you use tap water. It's going to drift big time. It's going to go up to like 6.5, 7.0, because the buffers in tap water are, the CalMag in there is quite a big buffer, and there's a good amount of it in there. And so you're going to have to keep putting pH down in it for several days before you finally get that water to stop buffering itself, to stop lifting itself up so fast. Anyway, so with RO water, that's not a problem. It stays stable for a lot longer. You might have to like use a little bit of pH down the next day, and then usually it stays stable. Anyway, and if you put just enough pH up to get it to about, or silica to get it to about 5.6, and then just wait a day before you use it to water with, it should raise up to about 5.8 by the next day or 12 hours later or so, and then it should stay there. It should be pretty stable at that point. Anyway, so I got it to that stable point, the 5.8. I lost my whole train of thought. Sorry. I'm just kind of fumbling now. Oh yeah. So I knew it took about a milliliter of silica to get it to that 5.8. And she was only putting 3 drops in there. And so I'm like, oh, that's bad. So basically we've been, watering with what she has been watering with, because I don't do any of the watering. Sometimes I go in the bedroom and I'll use the little syringe to kind of water them like that when they're still in the humidity dome, because that's not too hard for me to get out there in the bedroom, but in the garage it's more difficult. Anyway, so if it's 5.0, we'll just say 5.0, because it was kind of teeter-tottering between that. At 5.0, which is super low, not healthy for the plant, that makes it really difficult. Even if you have a really high chelating nutrients and it's actually easier for them to uptake nutrients when the pH is higher, when you have good chelating agents. That lower pH, it makes it harder, but it does help. It does make it to where they can lift it up even easier than if they didn't have that. So I think that that colossal P was their savior, especially because of the fulvic acid in there. And also just my nutrients themselves is having a really good chelating. Everything's very well chelated, so very high nutrients, easy for the plant to uptake. But even at 5.0, that's enough to kill a plant. I'm surprised that these ones didn't die. Anyway, so count for a little bit of drift. With only 3 drops, though, it's not going to drift much, like maybe a point or two. So at best, it might have drifted up to like 5.2 or something like that. But the thing is, because the probe is wrong, it might tell her that it's drifted up to, because remember, she was reading 5.8. So now it tells her it's drifted up to 6.0 or 6.1. So what was she doing? She was putting pH down in it, right? So sometimes she was going below that 5.0 reading. Anyway, all bad. Once I got the new batch of water made properly, pH with the new pen, had her start watering with that, about a day and a half later, boom, they started looking better. And this right here, I think was after maybe 2 days of being fed properly. 2 days of being fed the proper amount of pH. Everything else is the same. Nothing else changed, just the pH. How much silica we're putting in there to make sure it's the right pH. So if you use my nutrient line, that's a good base you can use, right? When you put 8 milliliters, for the veg stage, 8 milliliters of A and B, 7 milliliters of colossal P, 2 milliliters of CalMag per gallon of water. Per gallon of water, you're going to have to use right around 1 milliliter of silica. Now, the silica I use might be different than the silica you use, so I use Simply Silica, I think it's what it's called. But I think all silica is pretty similar. But anyway, so yeah, just get a ground base for that. Make sure to understand what that should be, what your pH should be. Get your probe when it's brand new, it's accurate, everything's good. Make your batch of water and then see how much pH up you have to put in there to get it to the proper pH to 5.8. Write that down. Write that note down. If it's half a milliliter, write it down. 1 milliliter, write it down. Whatever it is, write it down. Whatever you use to pH up with, write it down. And make sure to write down what you use to pH up with it so you remember what your note's about, because you might forget. So make sure to write down the brand of silica you're using, whatever. And this is how much of this particular stuff it takes to get it to that pH. And then if you're making a batch of water one day, and you're like, whoa, I put the amount of pH I usually put in there, the pH up I usually put in there, or the silica I usually put in there, and it's not going to 5.8, right? Or it went too high. Either it hasn't gone to 5.8 or it went too high. Then you know that the pH pin is wrong. Something's gone wrong with the pH pin. So you need to try to recalibrate it. And if after recalibrating it, it still is not reading 5.8 like it should, then it's probably time to change your pH pin. Well, actually, at that point, it is time. If you made accurate notes and everything, then it's time to change the pH pin. Now, if you're using tap water, you can't really rely on this so much because tap water will change throughout the year. So maybe make a batch with RO water or distilled water when you first get your pin. So if you're going to be using tap water or something and you're ever suspicious, then when you first get your pin, get some distilled water, do this test, write down the numbers so you know exactly how much it takes. And then if you start to get suspicious that your pen might be going out, make another batch using that same distilled water and make everything the same, and then see if it reads right. Put exactly the amount of silica or pH up you put in it before, and then test it. And if it's not 5.8, then your pen is going funky. Try to recalibrate it, see if it's still going funky. If it is, get a new pen or replace the probe. Okay, one last trick to do. As just a secondary test. And actually, you can actually grow this way. It's not super accurate, but you can definitely get away with doing this. I've done it before. You can use the drops, the pH drops. So with the pH drops, what you want to do is after you make your batch and everything's accurate, it's at 5.8. So now your pen's brand new, everything's good, it's at 5.8. Take the little thimble, that it comes with, a little cup thing it comes with, put your nutrient in there that you just made, put 2 or 3 drops in there like it says, and then see what color it turns. It should turn the color of about that 5.8. Note that color, note the color that it is, and then that's a secondary test you can do. And then you make a note of that, and so then if you ever feel that your probe is not reading right or something just seems wrong, go ahead and get the drops out and see if you're getting that same color. So, And like I said, if you don't have a pH pen or can't afford one, those drops are very affordable, the pH drops, and you can actually use them to do an entire grow with. You'll just want to make sure that on that first encounter, use something that you kind of know about where you need to be. So if you use my nutrient line, you know about 1 milliliter of the Simply Silica should get you to where you need to be, and so that should be good. And then go ahead and test with the drops. But if you really pay attention to the colors, like really pay attention to the colors, you should be able to get that color to right around that 5.8 to 6.0, enough to where the plant will be fine. Especially with my nutrients, they can handle that 6.0, they can handle that 6.2, and they're still going to uptake the nutrients quite well. So my nutrients allow for a much wider range, especially if you use the whole line, or at least what I just said. That is the Colossal P, the Fulvic CalMag, A and B. Use those, and then I'll obviously Flower Girl instead of the CalMag for the flowering time, like my thing says. If you use that basic lineup, you're going to definitely have a much easier time. Anyway, so your pH test drops will come with a chart like this, and you want it to be like not green and not like blue, and some of them are different. So you have to look at the one it is. So for example, this one looks a little different from what I can tell. Yeah, it looks a little different. So, but you can still see the 7.0 is like a greenish blue. If it looks anything like greenish blue, you're too high. You don't want to be there. If it looks anything like just pure PP yellow or anywhere towards orange, you don't want to be there. Right? So anything that looks pure yellow or orange, no good. You need more. You need to add more pH up. If it's going up into anything that looks blue, green, you're too high. You need to add pH down. Okay. So if you're using tap water, you're most likely going to be up here after you add your nutrients. You're going to want to put some pH down to get down to like a greenish yellow color. It doesn't want to be pure yellow though. It wants to be a little bit greenish, somewhere between these two colors if you can. Like more close to this color though. You want it to be a green yellow, not just pure green. If it looks pure green, that's wrong. You want it to look green yellow. You definitely don't want it to look just PP yellow though. That's too low. So make sure it looks a little bit greenish. A yellow that's starting to tend toward green. That's where you want to be. And yeah, so if you're using RO water, that's going to be the case. You're going to have to add pH up, and you won't have to add too much of it. So just remember, you want to get it to where it's right around that mark there. Now, this is where you definitely want to start making notes, because if you're using the drops, man, you're going to have to make notes because it gets a lot more difficult to keep track of what you're doing because it's just more time consuming. With the probe, you put it in there and you get the numbers almost instantly. And so you just keep adding a couple drops at a time and stir it, a couple drops at a time and stir it. With the drops, you have to add a couple drops, stir it, and then you have to take the thimble, pull it out, put a couple drops of your pH dropper in there, wait a second, see what color it turns, and go, okay, I went too high or too low. So just do a couple drops at a time and keep track of how much you're putting in there. So you know how many drops you've put in there, or you know how much of that milliliter. Like pull it up to the milliliter on your dropper, and then as you're putting it in there, keep track of how much of that milliliter is left. Do you use the whole milliliter? Did you only use half of it? And make a note of that so you know that's how much it took me to get to this proper color. And anyway, I've spent a lot of time on this, but I just want to make sure I cover it for everybody so everyone has a way to, because this is the number one problem with growing is pH issues. The number one, it's why they're getting deficiencies, is because their pH isn't right. One thing I didn't do is look at this plant and go, it must be a nitrogen deficiency, or it must be this deficiency. How do I fix that? No, that's not how to doctor a plant, right? You got to figure out the big things, the major things first. Was my coco buffered? Things like that. Okay, so most of the time, like I said, it's a pH issue, and that's how to fix it. It's really not that difficult to fix. Oh yeah, there's the dead one. Wait, where did it go? And come on, it's like right there. Dead. Poor thing. She never even made it past that first stage where she just had her first true leaves on her. She never got strong. I think it's because autoflowers, they veg very quickly, and photos don't veg very quickly. So they already had a lot more age on them. Like age wise, they were already a lot farther along than the photo period because they age faster. And so they already had several sets of leaves on them by the time they really started showing issues because of the pH being too low. and the photoperiod never even had like one tiny little set of leaves on them. So I think that played a big role why the autoflower survived it and the photoperiod did not survive it. All right, so I think what we're going to do then is we'll let these ones be in here for a little bit until the other ones are ready to go in here, and then once I need all the room in here, I think I'm going to put these in the bedroom and just let them kind of finish out in the bedroom and see what they do. I'm just kind of curious. I think they can still get 3 ounces on them, no problem. These strains are definitely capable of that, and so I think if everything else goes smoothly from here on out, the bedroom doesn't get too hot right now because it's still winter time. By the time they finish, though, which will be about 2 months from now or so, little out past that, it should still be cool enough outside because that's going to be putting us into all of January, all of February. Start getting to the beginning of March, it starts warming up a little bit, but not much. So I think it should be fine. I think they'll be fine. I don't think it'll get too hot in there. I can't run an AC in there because I don't have enough electricity going back there. And so that's out of the question. I would just have to use like a fan, and that helps a little bit. But yeah, basically that's why I try to only grow in the wintertime in the bedroom. But we'll see what happens. Yeah. Now, what's the other strains I got going? Let's go look at that real quick. What am I going to replace these with? All right, so this is what I'm replacing them with, the Colorado cookies, which will go into the hempy bucket. So we are still going to do the hempy bucket. We've grown Colorado cookies, auto Colorado cookies many times, so I know what to expect from it. And so that will go in the hempy bucket because I know she gets anywhere from 3 ounces to 10 ounces. Usually, though, she does 5 or more ounces. That's pretty consistent. There's been a few times where some of the phenotypes have only done 3 ounces, but most of the time she's 5 ounces or more for us. And at least for me when I grew it. Hopefully she follows all my instructions to the T, then she'll do that too. The OG Kush is the other one we're going to be doing. So Auto OG Kush. I think that's by Nirvana Seeds, if I remember correctly. And then we're also going to be doing a couple other things. So the other ones I want to do is going to be, I wanted to do Northern Lights times a Big Bud, but those seeds are like at least 8 years old. So they're super old and they're just not doing their thing. They start to kind of grow a tail and that's all they ever grow. And then they just, that's it. Because the thing is, the seed has all the energy in it to do the first thing it needs to do, to grow a taproot and then to grow little tiny little roots on that so it can start feeding nutrients. And that way once it starts feeding nutrients from the soil, then it can do the rest of the work and pop itself out of the seed and pop itself out of the earth and start getting sunlight and really start doing its thing. But if the seed's super old, I think what happens is sometimes they don't, that energy that's stored in them starts to dissipate over time, right? Because all the energy is stored inside the seed. And if that energy dissipates over time, which is to be expected, it kind of makes sense, unless you store it in a super proper way. If that energy doesn't, I have them in the fridge, but that's like, that can last for a few years. Like you'd have to like do some special kind of long-term storage for seeds, or we can store them like maybe a freeze dry or something like that. I'm not sure what they do, but there's some process they do to keep it seeds that can last like years and years. Well, I didn't do that, so just in the fridge. It's kind of crazy they've been in the fridge for 8 years. Like we've moved several times in 8 years, so like we've gone through more than one fridge since then. So they've transferred fridges and everything. Anyway, so I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't sure if they were going to pop. And what happens is they start growing. That little tail starts coming out. They kind of break out of the seed a little bit. The little tail starts growing out, but it never grows the little hairs it needs on that tail on the taproot to start sucking some nutrients in to finish its process. And that's the energy it has. And then if it never has enough of the roots in it, then it's never going to do anything, right? It doesn't matter how much you feed it. Nothing's going to happen. It's just going to sit there, right? The taproot's just not enough. It needs to have a little bit of those hairs. And so yeah, that's where it's at now. The little tail's peeking out. And that's it. That's after like 4 or 5 days. I don't think it's going to do anything. And so instead, I'm going to grow wreckage, which is train wreck time sage. Wreckage has mad potential to be a good yielder. I hope that one of the ones I put 2 of them in there. That's all I had left, or maybe it's 3, 2 or 3 anyway. One of the 2. Maybe the Northern Lights times cheese auto by Ministry of Cannabis. I think maybe that was the one I put 3 in. Either way, I just said, you know what? I don't want to take more chances because these are old seeds. So I'm just going to put 2 or 3 in there and then hopefully one of them does their thing. Yeah, so I went ahead and put, I think it was 3 Northern Lights times cheese in there and we'll see what happens. Hopefully which one does its thing fastest and biggest, and hopefully one of them do, and it should. They're not as old as the Northern Lights times Big Bud. I think they're like 4 or 5 years old. Same as the wreckage. And so hopefully the wreckage does its thing too. I got 2 of those. So hopefully one of them does its thing. If they both do their thing, then whatever which one looks like it's doing its thing faster, that'll be the one that I use. I'm just hoping that the phenotype I get is one that has mad potential to get big. So yeah, so these 2 will be in there. The OG Kush will be in a 5-gallon bucket with coco, same, and then the Colorado cookies will be in the hempy bucket, so pure perlite, and then the cheese will also go into a coco pot, and also the wreckage, the photoperiod. Sorry, my my voice all of a sudden is like going on me. The wreckage will also go into a bucket, not bucket, excuse me, a pot, 5-gallon pot with coco. I'll let it veg like that for a while before I transplant it. It should be able to get pretty decent size, like maybe let it veg for like, I don't know, a month or so before I transplant it. I'll make sure, however, once it's like kind of big and I start to train it and it starts to kind of get like bowl-like and decent size, like, 2 feet by 2 feet or something, then I'll go ahead and transplant it into its final pot, which is going to be a big fabric pot. So I'm going to do like a 20-gallon or something, 15, 20-gallon fabric pot. Probably 20-gallon. I think that's what I should do. And yeah, actually, I can't remember how big the 20 gallons were. I can't remember what I used last time, if I used the 15 or 20-gallon. One of those 2s is what I used last time. But yeah, so I'll use one of those 2. And I'll pop it in a 15 or 20-gallon. And yeah, we'll let her do her thing and let her veg out the rest of the time in that big pot and just get her roots nice and big. And because we're using the colossal P man throughout the whole grow, and then we're using that roots accelerator for the beginning of the grow. And if, by the way, if you can't afford both of those, then get the colossal P. And then you can just use that instead of the the root growth platinum, right? And that's going to just make you have explosive roots in the beginning and also throughout the entire grow. And then you can just use more of it. So instead of using like 7 milliliters for that first 7 days, use like 14 milliliters just to make sure they're getting that extra hormone they need for the root development. And then using that colossal P throughout the rest of the grow just does so much for the plant, But definitely that root, so you just get some big, nice, healthy roots. Yeah, so I'm pretty excited about it. And then I have another one coming for the next grow. I wish I had it already, but it's not going to be here in time. So I managed to get a hold of some. They're kind of hard to find. They're really hard to get. You can't. I mean, if you're in the UK, you can get them very easily because you can just get them from Royal Queen Seeds. But if you're not in the UK, if you're in the United States, they're really hard to find. But it's the Royal Queen Seeds photo period feminized cookies gelato. Now you can find like their green gelato. That's not as hard to find, but the cookies gelato is kind of hard to find. Now this is a really high THC and a really high yielder according to them. So I'm really looking forward to doing that next grow. Really wanted to do it this grow, but not gonna get them in time. So next grow, yeah, that's what I have in plan. I'm gonna just grow one big massive cookies gelato. We'll see how big it gets. And what I'm thinking, what do you guys want to see in the future? Do you want to see me do another big plant of a different strain, or well, I don't know. I mean, who knows what happens with the gelato? Maybe it's like, oh, that was kind of disappointing, or something. Let's do it again. We can do it bigger. Or what if we hit that 2-pound mark? But it's like, man, I know we can push some of these strains past that. I mean, it's really not easy to get 2 pounds indoors off one plant. If you think it's so easy, go find people doing it. It's hard to find people pulling 2 pounds dry off of one plant indoors. It's not easy, I'm telling you. There's a reason why these seed companies don't even list them as being able to do that outdoors, right? Like, for example, Carnival, I wrote them a letter, let him know that, hey, or I wrote him an email just today saying, hey, I just want to let you know that your plant has more potential than you're giving it credit for. So for outdoors, they say the max you're going to get is like 550 to 600 grams per plant. I'm like, dude, I like doubled that, well, almost doubled that. So like your plant can definitely do bigger than that outdoors. And anyway, so because I did that indoors, So I was just kind of surprised. And so outdoors, the reason why it's easier to get these bigger yields is because you're vegging for like 2 months outdoors, right? It's vegging. Maybe you throw it out there in March, or not March, excuse me. You throw it out there like in May, mid-May or end of the May. So it veggies all of June, all of July. So that's 2 months right there. It veggies all of those months. All of those 2 months is pure veg time. So 2 months for sure of pure veg time. You probably veg it indoors for a little while first too before you put it outdoors. And then it veges for part of August. Some strains veg all the way throughout August. That's like 2 to 3 months of veg time, right? At least 2.5 months, right? So that's pretty much what you're going to get guaranteed. You're going to get at least 2.5 months of veg time outdoor growing, and that's a lot. That's a long time. So if you want to try to replicate that with one big plant indoors, you got to veg for that amount of time, right? You might be able to get away with vegging a little bit less if you use my system. And I sometimes feel like I have to slow it down because it's like, autoflowers need to finish faster because I can't flip it until the autos are finished, and it's like it's getting too big, it's getting crazy. So I would definitely flip them a lot earlier than that if it weren't for the autoflowers. They get too big. So you can probably get away with about with my system and using all my nutrients and everything, especially the colossal P, you can probably easily get away with flipping it, especially if you do clones, under 2 months, right at the 2 month mark or under 2 months. Especially if you do clones, you can definitely get under 2 months veg time to get a nice big plant that has a big root system inside of a 20 gallon, and then boom, flip it, and then you can get that 2 pound mark if everything else goes right for you and you have the right strain and stuff. Yeah. So anyway, it's not easy to get though. Like I said, that 2 pound mark off a plant, whether you're outdoors or indoors, it's not easy to get. And if you happen to be lucky enough to live in a really good climate like Humboldt, California, and you can just pop it in the ground, like dig a big ass hole and then put some nice soil in there, or use big 100-gallon air pots, yeah, you can get 3 pounds plus off a plant. I've seen people get 6 pounds, 10 pounds off their plants. We're talking giant 15-foot big ass trees. Like so wide, like 15 feet wide, 15 feet tall, or at least if they're not 15 feet wide, they're pretty close to it. 10 feet wide, 15 feet tall. They're just massive, huge plants. I've seen some get pretty close to that here in Oregon too. If you're in the right part of Oregon, you can get some pretty big plants. Anyway, outside of that, if you don't live in that perfect climate, you're probably not going to get them that big. But anyway, so yeah, just keep in mind that that's important to get that veg time in there. So one thing I was thinking about doing for the future though is after we do the big gelato or gelato, I think that's how it's said, cookies gelato. After we get that plant in the next grow and hopefully break that 2 pound mark, then I want to try to maybe grow more than one plant in an area under one light to try to really push the boundaries and get toward that 3 pound mark that I know the lights can do, especially the Goliath V2. We did some recent testing. I haven't put the video out yet, but it shows me doing that. It shows doing the measurements from different heights and then also out to the edge, and its average par. So it's PPFD, whatever that they call it for its average par, and then that number and how big it can get. Anyway, it's massive. Like I couldn't believe it. It's like 700 and something, almost 800. It's insane. I've never seen a light test like that. Not even a light that uses 1,000 watts. Not even an LED that uses 1,000 watts. I've never seen one test that high. Like it's insanely high. And I think that has to do with the double lens technology because other bar lights don't come close to that. I guarantee it. Take your spider light and try it. Test it from the best height you can, and put it at the best height for the best optimal results, and then do 17 measurements. Make sure that you're doing one in the center and only one in the center, and then you're doing 4 a foot away and the 4 corners. That's 8, and do another 8 out on the 4x4 area. So at least that many. And then that's how I do it to get the average. But you only can do one in the center, right? You can't just do like one in the very center and then like 5 inches away from the center start doing it. Like that's not going to give you an accurate average. So one in the center, and then you do 8 for the first foot away from the center, and then you do 8 for the 2 feet away from the center. Now, by 2 feet, I mean that it's 2 foot from the center on each side of the center. That's total of 4 by 4 feet, right? And if you do that and then do that, and you add all those numbers together and then divide by 17, because you took 17 points of measurement, then you're going to get the average. And I've never seen any of the light do that, especially these bar designs. Most bar designs aren't very good. That's why I avoided the bar design for so long. Like, I love the idea. I wanted to have a bigger spread out thing, and I've tried different ways to do that. And what ended up working was using these SMDs with the double lens technology. That's what ended up doing the job, and it does it so well. Under 700 watts of electricity, bringing you at like 740 something, whatever it was, 750. It's on the website, the exact average par, but it's just insane. You're getting like 1,000 in the center, and you're still getting like 600 on the edges, and and the corners are still getting like 5 to 400. It's insane. Like, it's just crazy. Not even the double lens bulb does that. The double lens, the DE, right? The 1,000 watt DE, which uses 1,150 watts. That's how much it actually draws from the wall. That's what I used to grow with. Remember those big, the really powerful double-ended bulbs? One, they're super hot, right? They use a lot of electricity and they get really hot. Anyway, so they're great bulbs, but the Goliath V2 uses under 700 watts, and I guarantee you it beats that light. Like, I guarantee it now. Like, seeing the average par, it's like, yeah, even on the edges, it beats it. It just blows it away. Like, that light just cannot compete. That light, I know, because I did the testing when I had that light up and running, and I did all the tests back in the old house, and I showed it all in real time and everything for those that remember seeing it. It has an average of like 600, I think 80 par, something like that. It's pretty high, but it wasn't over 700. And the Goliath V2 is over 700. The max yield was right at the same as that light. So it's right around that 680 or so mark. So the Goliath V2 does beat the max yield. The max yield has slightly better penetration though. So it can actually penetrate a little bit deeper into the plant. But honestly, the Goliath V2 penetrates 6 feet at over 300 par, or right at 300. I have it on the video, but it's like crazy. It's insane. It has massive, you can grow a really tall plant. It's going to penetrate all the way down there really good. 300 par with my spectrum is really good. You can get nice big fat buds with 300 par. So even if you had something that was 5 feet away from the light, that bud is still going to get massive, right? It's still going to get huge. And yeah, so good stuff. Anyway, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. Definitely check out the new nutrients. Also, I have stickers. If you haven't got a chance to check those out, definitely check those out. And check out Grow Pot Cheaply again, because it's working again. I got Grow Pot Cheaply updated. Everything's working again. I'm slowly updating the course. So you can see some of the videos now are newer videos that are more to the point. They're not nearly as long. And yeah, I think they're very nice. They're much nicer than the old ones. And I plan on updating them as I go. I'm working on a new one right now for the feeding the nutrients for the first 7 to 10 days. So I'm going to be uploading that one soon. And yeah, stay tuned. Much love. Let me know what you want to see in the future. Should I do a 4x4 with like 9 plants and 3-gallon pots? 2 to 3 gallon pots, and then we will top them twice, top each one twice, maybe even put them in a tomato cage to make sure they don't get too wide. Because if you're doing 9 in a 4x4 area, they can't get very wide. So 8 tops is pretty much all you want. So you just top them twice, and that will give you 8 tops. And then you can put them in a tomato cage so they don't get too wide on you. Or you can just like tie around the outer perimeter, like wrap it around them so they don't get too wide. Because you don't want them like all like growing into each other and stuff. Make sure to cut all the bottoms off pretty much, like do a really good cutting of the bottom leaves. So that's just pretty much all the tops of plants that are anyway, doing that method, it's not too difficult usually to get 3 pounds if you have the right strain. So if we get like a strain that's really good at that, like maybe this gelato looks like it's good at that, then maybe do something like that for the next grow. But let me know what you guys think. Would you want to see something like that? Or what kind of grow do you want to see? I like doing experiments and stuff. So what do you guys want to see? Please vote, write it in the comments, make your voice be heard. What kind of grows would you like to see be done? Would you like to see maybe a grow from clones being done? What kind of grow method? Mainly I just do my grow method. So I don't know. I might do a deep water culture if I get enough votes for it. Get enough people saying, please do a deep water culture. I haven't done one in a while, but they're not too difficult to do. Let's see. By different grows, I mean like strain wise. Do you want autos still? Do you want just photos? Would you want to see one with a shorter veg time, like maybe only a month veg time from seed, to see what the potential is like if you do it that way? Things like this. Okay, thanks.